Pieper, when he's talking about hope as a theological virtue, says the natural virtues that need to be cultivated when we speak about hope is magnanimity and humility, that we have to be bold in our desires, bold in our requests, but humble in the fact that it's only God and God alone who can guide us towards it. So magnanimity and humility is what leads us against this, is what anchors us against this. And this is what anchors us against, or protects us rather, against false hope as well. If it's just my doing or my capacity or my ability to save myself, well, we are in for a pickle, are we not? And it's that false hope that I think we have to contend ourselves, particularly when we think about, culturally speaking, honestly, like this techno, Pelagianism, that we think that technology and science is going to be the thing that will save us. It's done great things. It's made great advances. We live in a better place, of course. We absolutely are grateful for the impact and the effects the humans have made in these disciplines. But in and of themselves, science will not save us. Jesus Christ saves us. Again, spes unica, our only hope rests in the Lord. So yes, natural hopes are good. Natural hopes guide us. Natural hopes lead us towards this fuller, deeper hope. And this is what Pieper says. All our natural hopes tend toward fulfillments that are like vague mirrorings and foreshadowings, like unconscious preparations for eternal life. Every time a desire is fulfilled, that's God smiling on us and reminding us that, hey, this is good, but I got more. Every time that we achieve a goal, good, deep, meaningful goals that we cry our eyes out when we achieve them, we can't put a tent there. We can't do as Peter wanted to do a transfiguration, say, it's good, we're going to stick a tent here, we're going to make this, we're going to stake this claim, we're going to make this holy. No, we keep going. We keep moving forward. And God says, yeah, that was good. It was good you got that glimpse. You're going to need that glimpse. But let's keep going. Let's keep seeing how far we can go in this project of making you the best version of yourself. Every one of our desires are good, even our unfulfilled desires. This is what Martin Luther King spoke about in his sermon, Unfulfilled Dreams, that even the desires that we have in our hearts that are left unfulfilled in and of themselves are still good that they were there. I'm 40. I contend with my limitations. There's so much more that I thought I would have done by this point. And I recognize that I'm not going to do everything that I want to do. And I have to embrace the limitations and the smallness of my life and recognize that even the little things that I've done have had merit. They have meant something. They have been enough because God has seen it. And God will use all these different seeds, use all the different things that I've done, and to be able to bring about some grace, some goodness in ways that I honestly have no idea how he's going to do it. So we bring this back then to this passage here. Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. You think about peace. Rest in peace is what we put on the tombstones of people. Why? Because we recognize the hardships of life. We recognize the difficulties there. We recognize the tendency to despair. We recognize the errors in our judgments and placing hope in false things and lesser things. And God knows that. But as we journey through this, as we pray, as we grow in the spiritual life, as we graft ourselves to the tree of life that is Jesus himself, we grow in having peace with God. Peace, assimilation, healing, reconciliation, all these things we've spoken about. Understanding that everything in my life has had a plan. Every hardship, there's been purpose in. God, I have peace in every sin that I have committed, in every error that I've done, because I'm trying to move forward, because I believe that I've been justified by you. I believe that you have grace that will guide, that will overcome every one of my mistakes, that I can learn from everything that I've done, that I cannot erase the past, but that I can move forward. So we have peace with God through Jesus Christ, through whom we have gained access to this grace in which we stand. How have we gained access to the grace? Come on, Holy Cross, spes unica. That's it. In the Holy Cross, that's how we've gained access to this grace. And therefore, we boast in the hope of the glory of God. And not only that, but we boast of our afflictions. Why? Because God says that we can overcome everything, everything. He can use everything for his goodness, knowing that this affliction produces endurance, and that this endurance proven character, and proven character hope, and hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Brothers and sisters, open our hearts to the Lord. Open our hearts to him. Let us desire him as we should. Let us put him above everything. Let that be the supreme value in our life upon which we orient everything else. Let that be the supreme goal upon which that we are desiring to achieve in everything that we do. We believe in this hope. We believe in this goodness. We believe in this grace that God desires to give to us. So it is not an easy task that's set before us, for sure. We all have to contend with it in our own ways, in our own sufferings, in our own realities. But we believe, again, that God is bigger than all of this, and not in a cliche, cheap way, but in a truthful, honest, humble way. That God's mercy will guide us in everything that we do. So, amen. Thank you guys so much. I'm going to stop my screen share here and give this back to Dr. Amick.
Good to go. Jordan, are we back? Are we back with the panelists? All right, as our panelists join us now, I'm just going to highlight a few key areas, and thank you for your questions. If we have time, we'll answer one. We have one from a member of our faculty at the University of Holy Cross, so hopefully we have time for that. But as I kind of reflect on some of the key elements that Dr. Sacasa just talked about, the first is, and you mentioned this a few times, it seems like if you want to engender the virtue of hope, do not name your child Killmonger. Is that one of the key takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, it's right there in the name, right? Obviously, it's what he is. He's a monger.
Right. It's like if you name your child so-and-so the apostate, what do you expect, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
All right. So, but one of the elements you really focused on was a radical contingency, right? Mm-hmm. That on one hand, the psychological approach to hope, involves agency, it involves imagination, it involves the ability to think I can change the future, and yet we come up against this human experience of, but I can't change whether or not my children get sick. Right. I can't change economic factors. I can't change so many more things than I actually can. And that seemed to be, from what you said, really like a profound endorsement of Christian identity, right? So the Catholic Christian identity that we share at the University of Holy Cross, we're one of the things that we're navigating right now, and I love it, is how do we maintain a prophetic witness, a Christian witness in an increasingly pluralistic and secular society? Now, the people that come to UHC realize I'm coming to a Catholic university. I'm purposely choosing that, and there's a reason for it. But if we have, approximately 60% Roman Catholic, approximately 30% Baptist, especially African-American Southern Baptist, and approximately 10% Muslim, as well as others with little religious affiliation, we are navigating how to show God's love to them. And I think in some cases doing great work, in other cases, challenging missteps. Recently, one of the guiding documents we looked at to be able to determine what this looks like, as I was reading through and seeing, I wasn't seeing contingency. I wasn't certainly seeing the exercise of the virtues. And then I realized it was a corporate manifesto. It was how to set up a diversity committee at a secular corporation. And so what you're highlighting is, in light of the fact that God is God and I am not, I think that helps us to plan our work, to make it personal, to say, I can't change the world, but I can, through God's grace, change me. And what that requires is an understanding of the God that's particular to where we are. I think that very much comes from the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, the God who is so humble that he becomes an embryo in the womb of Miriam of Nazareth. And that this gives us the means by which to move forward, and to grow in hope, but also to take a humble, right? To be able to take a humble posture and realize, when I started this work at UHC, I was, the grant request said, to end poverty, to set up this program, to do this and that. And the first step I said was, what are the unique things we can't do and the unique things that we can do, right? What can we do? And so in light of the Catholic Christian identity of where we are, the Christian identity that we share, through the different institutions that we serve, I would like to offer this question to the panel. How in your work have you seen the virtue of hope present, so that not only does it avoid despair, right, which is really, and as I'm listening, and I don't know if another theologian has come up with this, but I saw despair as an expression of pride. Because it's like saying, God, you are not, the only thing that can really be an impediment to your grace, to your life given to me, is me.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow I'm more powerful than you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I will not be open to your grace. Somehow I'm more powerful than you. So for our panelists, for Angel first and then Chuck, how have you seen hope destroy despair, but also destroy the flip side? And you didn't use this term, but I think it's appropriate, this false hope, or this presumption that says, I don't need to change. I don't need to change. Angel?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important question. And again, Dr. Sacasa, just really, enjoy the depth of the discussion that you're giving us, and hear the theological discussion especially. So I know that many of us, many of those who are listening to us are leaders in some way in the community, and part of what Dr. Sacasa talked about was burnout, and sometimes giving into the despair that doesn't matter what, what I do, it's just not gonna, nothing's gonna happen. So one of the things that came to mind for me in that in particular is the importance of being rooted in a faith community.
Mm-hmm.
That it would be the height of pride to think, I, Angel Parham, am going to change the world. I am going to do this. I think that is part of almost how things are presented to us in the secular world. Come to our college, come to our school so we can show you how to change the world. Okay, maybe, but there's a lot within ourselves that we have to get right, that we have to understand of who we are and how God has made us. And also we do need that faith community to stand behind us, to buttress us, to help us and to give hope, and to know that we are not the be all and the end all of making this happen, because that is a false pride that leads us up to destruction. The other thing I would say is, again, for me, I spend so much of my time in the world of the academy, and within sociology in particular, there is a lot of focus on, injustice and inequality and what can be done. And I'm all for it. That's kind of how I'm made to think about those questions. But I have seen over the years a difference between how I approach this and others that I know who are like those on this panel, a very important difference in the way I approach it, and sometimes my colleagues will approach it, where I've noticed that for many, and not just colleagues when I was in graduate school, other graduate students, that there was this way of approaching it that was mostly just filled with anger, and kind of this sense of, and there is a room for righteous anger, absolutely. But when you don't have that hope, and you don't have what Dr. Sacasa was talking about, that constant remembrance of how God has been with his people and has brought his people through incredible odds. When you don't have that hope, then it's a very, I think it can be a very destructive thing that can tear you apart, because you just see all of this evil and you don't have any hope that anything can really be done about it. So I think it's very important too, when we're working with our students, that to instill that sense of God, of hope, and particularly through the scriptures, what has God shown us about who he is? And then when I'm thinking in particular about an African-American community and working with my African-American students, how has God been with us as African Americans, as a people, through incredibly difficult odds that were before us. And part of what you were saying earlier too, Todd, is that we have an increasingly secular culture. And so part of what I've seen, when I've been in some of the little Bible lessons that we have in our curriculum with the kids, is they don't know the basic Bible stories. Like we start to talk about Adam and Eve or Noah's Ark, and we kind of just get these blank looks, which is very worrisome to me. So I think, and I see that in my college students as well. Oh, well, the story of, we're reading a short story that was very clearly modeled on King Solomon and the two women with the baby. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, yeah, you know the story, right? Kind of got all these blank looks. And then one young woman kind of hazarded a guess, and she kind of had the hazy outlines of it, but there was just nothing, So like just these basic stories, if you don't have, part of what we've talked about is the importance of story, the importance of memory. You get that by training our young people. And so when our very youngest people, and we work in Yansa with 5 to 11-year-olds, when they don't know those foundational stories, how can we even begin to cultivate this idea of hope and the promises of God? So we definitely rely a lot on Bible stories, just basic competence. And part of how I talk about this too is that I really believe this is important, even if our program, our curriculum is being used in a non-Christian context, because so much of our culture and our literature assumes a basic knowledge of the Bible, there's still a reason for people to know those stories. Mm-hmm. But all the more so for those of us who are believers and working within the community of believers, when that's not being passed down to young people as a matter of course, that's a real concern.
I think that's really meaningful, Angel. A neighbor of mine who's an attorney, a very well-known attorney in town, was saying that when he went to Loyola, there were 5 courses that everyone had to take. There were, I think, 3 philosophy and 2 theology, which kind of formed that core and a shared patrimony by which then to approach law, medicine, economics, with law enforcement, whatever area you go into. We presently have 2, which gives us a chance to be able to then root every one of the other majors in this, this Catholic Christian tradition. But I think that's really meaningful. Chuck. Good job.
As I was listening to Dr. Sacasa, we get most of our kids around 12 to 14 years old, and obviously depending on what their exposure to faith has been and church has been, is a pretty wide range. We do require the kids to go to church on Sunday. Obviously, they're all in Catholic schools, and so they began getting introduced to some of Christian teaching and that kind of stuff, and Catholic teaching. However, you take I just use a 14-year-old who really hasn't been raised in the church. She moves into our house. We put her into Dominican, and she starts taking theology classes at Dominican. And I mean, she I can remember the first week she came back and she was like this theology stuff is kind of strange. She's like, I don't know anything they talk about, and everybody else seems to know what what they're talking about. And I said, well, that's the unfortunate side of you moving into a school where most of these kids have gone to Catholic school all their lives, so they've had this this continuum of education. And she's like, well, I said, so like, what are your questions? She's like, well, so I guess my first question is like, how do you believe in that stuff? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, over time, and obviously she knew of God and she knew Jesus and she knew the terms, but knew none of the stories. And so beginning to try to overcome that. Not to mention, I always, my introduction to them is, look, your faith is typically, you have a faith by birth, you have a kind of a developmental faith that you begin to explore as you mature, and then you have more of a convictional faith as you begin to set your own belief system, and how does that tie into faith worship and that kind of stuff. And so I'm like, just know that you're still in the exploration phase, and people start at different levels. But it's, and I always try to use people stories, because like we have a ton of people that help us, from people that drop off meals to us to tutors. There's no shortage of a number of people giving their time and efforts and money to create opportunity and to allow our organization to work. And so there are those examples, and many of them are driven by obviously their faith. Majority of our donors are Catholic, and so I have people examples to use, and and even our staff is that we could probably all be making a lot more money working somewhere else if we really wanted to, but it's because of our belief in giving kids an opportunity, and that they do matter, and that we want their lives to be better. And that comes from for most of us, from a place of our faith development and faith expression, that we do this work. And so, trying to use examples of people which they can relate to. And so for many of our kids, they've received food from food pantries, or from, support from churches. And so they've had experiences where these groups have helped. And what I try to utilize, and going kind of back to our Men and Women for Others mantra that we get from the Jesuits, is that how can you now become that helper? How can you now begin to express your value for people, and eventually, your love and desire to follow God's teachings in the work that you do. And it's a little bit easier path, I think, for teenagers to be able to go, even just recently being able to go, and we actually went, because we have limited ability with COVID to get out and do work. One of our grandmothers needed her yard cut and cleaned up and that kind of stuff. So we were able to go, and actually we've begun just helping our own families within the program for right now, because it's a more controlled setting. But everybody has the ability to do that, and to make Miss Nelson's life a little bit better by spending a day helping her clean her yard and straighten out some things and get stuff out of the way. And so, trying to tie that back to faith, and to for our middle school girls, I always use, it's not okay to be mean, you go to Catholic school, you go to church every Sunday, and then you're like brutally mean to to people in your life. I'm like, can you see where those things don't match up? That if, you're hearing this stuff at church and you're hearing this stuff at school, that should drive you to say, you're supposed to be treating people well. You're supposed to be bettering people's lives, and trying to use those examples. And it's probably our biggest challenge. Not only the secular aspects of society and social media, and just being a teenager, just their maturational status. It's our biggest challenge, and it's, for adults, for me, it's very easy to understand these concepts. But to get it down to their level takes a lot of work. And then not just that, all of our staff come from different upbringings and different faith perspectives. And so when we talk about co-parenting, and for you guys that are parents, to co-parent with another adult raising your own kids, we're trying to co-parent with 4 adults in the house who all grew up in different home environments, who didn't choose to co-parent with the people they're living with 8 kids that aren't their own. And so it gets really complicated, and, you run into a lot of challenges. And, but
Chuck, it almost sounds a little bit like a reality TV show in the making.
It's interesting though, because you see these clips, and I'll stop right after this. You see these positive glitches of where the scholars, our students, began kind of explaining to the staff why we do these things and why it's important. And like we do it because our school teaches it. Like a lot of our staff didn't go to Catholic schools, so it's nice when you begin to see the kids start to explain to the staff, why are we doing these things, and why do we have to do community service on Saturday? Why do we have to go to church on Sunday and those things? And so it is planting the seed and cultivating the seed, and it does take time, but you do see, sprouts of your, the fruit of your work periodically. And so
Absolutely. And I think the work you do, the work Angel does, and I pray also the work that we're privileged to be able to do at the University of Holy Cross expresses that as well. I think one element that I really heard coming through everything you were saying, but also what Dr. Sacasa was saying, is that in an increasingly pluralistic and secular world, to have a Christian identity, in our case, a Catholic Christian identity, really is in itself diverse. That the outreach we have is a result of the love that God has shown to us and the love that we then enter into and model for others, but that it isn't therefore diverse for us to say we're going to be diverse by looking like everybody else, right? That there's a uniqueness, there's something special there. And quite frankly, I'll say that it's a privilege to be able to be in an environment where we can affirm with charity, with prudence, and with love, the fact that God's in love with us and calls us to love others. One of our questions, and I think it's going to be better handled on the back end of the next talk, is what are concrete ways that we can exercise hope in the work that we do? So we'll take a quick break. It's 11:19. We'll begin promptly at 11:24. Dr. Sacasa will talk for about 20 minutes. We'll have about 15 after that, and then we'll have a recap. During this break, if you will access the University of Holy Cross website, go to Healing Action, which is on the banner, and you can RSVP for our next talk, which is going to be on October 23rd. We're also going to be sending you a link to the videos for this talk so that you can share them with your family, your community, and your friends, so that we can continue this conversation where we are. We'll see you in about 4.5 minutes. Thanks so much.
Dr. Sacasa, you good to lead us off?
All right, let's roll. We're good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Hope everybody had a nice little stretch break. A couple comments that I want to say in response to some of the things that were said by the panelists that I think are important just to kind of spend a little bit more time reflecting on before we move into exploring strategies of ways of increasing hope. Is first, when Dr. Angel was speaking about the concept of you can change the world, and I think sometimes we offer that as a cliche, and I think that's a false hope, I would say. The truth is that like very few of us are going to change the world. When we think of like things that actually have changed the world, okay, maybe the iPhone, smartphones, that's changed the world. That's fundamentally changed the way that we relate as people, that we conduct our affairs. The internet, of course, these are things that have fundamentally changed the way that we deal with things. Although the problem is, of course, and this is what a lot of the science is showing, is that evolutionarily speaking, we haven't changed much. And so now we're having to contend with these new virtual realities that we're really just not evolutionarily equipped for. But again, that's a whole nother conversation. So our goal shouldn't necessarily be to change the world per se, but really we can stay more focused on ourselves, on our communities, on our neighbors. These are the places that we can have great impact. We can have impact on our neighbors and on our communities. My boys, they play basketball for Kenner Rec League. And and I'm amazed that each of the gyms are dedicated to some person. And I have no idea who those people are. I have no idea why they got their names on the gym. I have no idea, but I know they must have done something important in the community, and not just in the community as a whole, but in that particular neighborhood. They must have done something special enough to merit getting named or to get their plaque hanging on a gym. So God bless them, And again, that's not necessarily a goal either, to get a plaque hanging on our gym or whatever. But nevertheless, my point in saying is that like our goals should be, if we're called to serve, our goals should be to serve at the most local level. That's the law of subsidiarity, that we serve at the most local level, that we make change at the most local level. And as a collection of nodes in this larger network, that's when change really kind of happens from the ground up, not from the top down. And so that's one thing. And then the connection with tradition and faith, I said right from the outset that it's going to be hard to talk about hope completely divorced from faith and from love. And we saw that beautifully in Chuck's dialogue about when they talk about, the girls and getting them in school and making sure they're educated in the faith, but also in their capacity to serve, as the Jesuits encouraged to be men and women for others. That act of serving, being for others, is love in action, is charity as we understand it, willing the good of other people. So we see this intimate connection between the two. I will say that as we speak about hope, again, connected to faith, set of values, set of belief, tradition, these things that we place our hope in, that these stories do have some meaning. These stories do have purpose. And then if we divorce ourselves, if we cut ourselves away from these stories, then there will be implications of that down the line. Maybe not so much right now, but in the future, we will see that. And I think we're already starting to see that. Angel, when she spoke again about just the way that she approaches the research, that as a sociologist, she wants to explore problems. She wants to find solutions to these sociological issues and ills. But the way in which that she approaches them seems to be a little bit different than some of her colleagues, and that there isn't as much anger, vitriol. And again, if we are to save ourselves, then we have to be crafty enough to come up with the solutions. We have to come up with all the answers. We have to come up with all the solutions, and all the burden rests on us. And that is a very, very, very exhausting proposition. And then it leads very much to then anger within ourselves and our own limitations and our own, capacities and own limitations, our own inability to be able to solve all these problems. But then at the same time, it also then projects out, because that's what we do when we get angry. We don't just stay angry at ourselves. We project out into problems and blaming and judging everybody, and not trying to be honest and sincere in how we actually deal with these issues. So we have to be able to stay rooted in these traditions, in these stories, in these narratives that have governed all of Western history. They are important. They're not just accidents. They're reasons why these stories have lingered and why these stories need to continue to be passed off onto our children, because they are the fabric, the very fabric of what our society rests on. Okay, so let's get back into then hope, exploring hope. I'm not going to have time. I'm going to try to wrap up here just in about 10 or 15 minutes. I really don't want to go too long, because I know there are some questions, and I know the panelists are going to have some responses as well. And I want to make sure that we're very timely with our ending, that we have a hard out at noon. So I don't have enough time to go into a full detailed exercise. But I just really want to kind of prime the pump and say, okay, if you find yourself in a situation where you are struggling with hope, what are some things that you can do? What are some strategies that you can employ? Well, the first one is actually memory, as we've been talking about kind of loosely, but let's kind of make this very concrete. Neurologists have studied the parts of the brain that get activated when we are recalling stories. And those nodes, the networks within the brain that get activated when we're recalling memory, we're recalling stories, are the same networks that get activated when we activate our imagination, when we talk about creating stories. Because what we know about memory right now is that memory, particularly at what we call episodic memory of our own experiences, not just data, not just dates and figures, or not just kind of an implicit memory of me walking, whatever, but like episodic, memory, semantic memory of me being able to recall stories and narratives of my life. What we know about our memory now isn't that it's just like a reel that plays, like with access to hippocampus, as if it's like a hard drive that we just hit play, pull up that file, comes into our conscious, and it just repeats kind of unscathed. No, that what memory, when we're actually recalling a memory, what we're doing is we're taking bits and pieces of different parts of our brain and compiling a story together, actually. And that story is our own story for sure, but that story is in fact impacted by other people's stories. It's impacted by our current subjective nature. If I am sad or depressed, the way that I recall certain memories will be impacted by the way that I currently am experiencing. We see this repeatedly when it comes to false memories. People, when they recall September 11th or studies that even before then that were done on, do you know where you were when JFK was shot? People will swear that they know exactly where they were, and then they'll interview those people 15 years later, and then the stories are different. Why? Why does that happen? It's because memory is very subjected to our current environment. But what this speaks to is really a beautiful connection between our memory and our imagination. Our memory and our capacity to solve. Why do we have an imagination? We have our imagination to be able to create, to solve problems. We have our imagination because it's intimately connected with everything that we're speaking about with hope. There's one study that was done that did a very specific memory recall intervention, and it's called episodic memory induction. Very particular way of being able to recall a very particular memory with great details. You get a group of people, what the study does, they got a group of people to do this exercise in great detail, recall this memory, do the exercise of the episodic memory induction. And then following that exercise of the memory induction, what they did is they gave people a brick. And then they said, all right, look at this brick and create as many solutions as possible, as many, not solutions, as many possible uses of this brick and appropriate possible uses of the brick. This used to be called, function fixedness, or what's referred to now as divergent thinking, right? So what are the many different divergent ways that I can use this brick? What the study showed is that in the groups that did have the episodic memory induction, they generally created more divergent possibilities with the brick than the control group that didn't have the episodic induction. It's awesome. It's just fascinating. It's fascinating. This is why, again, we're talking about personally why we need to cultivate good story, good imagination, good memory, recall the stories of our past. But then think about that again, as Dr. Parnham has been encouraging us to think about that sociologically. Man, what an implication if as a society we lose our collective memory. What impact will that have on our imagination and our capacity to solve problems, our creativity, our engine, our drives, our hope? All of those things if we get disconnected from our collective traditions and memories. So what's one thing that you can do to increase hope? Find somebody who's gone through some challenges in your life. We've already been kind of speaking about this in terms of just by proxy being connected with representation and listening to stories. But you know what? Go interview that person. Go call that person. I shared a story of my mom calling me. This was a month ago or 2 months ago when we did the first part of this back in August. It literally was like a week before my mom called me and just started sharing the story of how we immigrated to this country. And it was really encouraging. It was exactly what I needed to be able to be reminded that I can overcome. How did she do it? What did she do? The particulars of that. Then even in my own life, trying to anchor or remind myself of times that God genuinely manifested himself. From the first moment of my conversion as a lost freshman in college, to the time I met my wife, to my wedding day. My wedding day was spectacular. To the days that each of my kids were born, to the studying and completing my master's, to the early successes that I had. All of these things, and again, even right up until the marathon here recently, all of these things I want to hold on to in my memory banks. I want to share these stories with my kids. I want to be reminded continually of how I've been able to overcome certain obstacles, so that when the future obstacles do come, and they will come, they have come, they continue to come, I'm anchoring my current experience in something larger than just my own subjectivity. See, the problem with depression or hopelessness is as we've spoken about, is a certain arrogance. Yes, for sure. Certain pride. Yes, for sure. But there's a certain limitation in it. It's saying then that everything that I'm experiencing right now is reality in and of itself. And what we know about depression is that it isn't reality. It is certain thoughts are firing, certain emotions are firing a certain way. Yes, there's an experience of that feels very real, that is real. When we talk about capital R reality, something larger than just my own subjectivity, that's what I want to place my hope on. So yes, I don't discredit or deny the times that I do feel burnout or sadness or any of those particular difficulties. But even in those moments, I have to still try to anchor myself on something else. And so how do I do that? Story. People's stories of overcoming trials and obstacles, memory of my own life, memory of the stories that I know through scripture, the past, the history that I am connected with. All of those things are absolutely important when it comes to cultivating hope in your life. Second thing that you can do is and this was the exercise I wanted to do today, but I'm just really running out of time. Get very concrete in terms of what your goals are. Look at the various domains of your life. Look at your family. Look at your personal health. Look at your work, and look at leisure. Look at the various domains of your life and take time to articulate three goals that you have for each of those. What are 3 goals that I want to accomplish in my family? You don't have to set any time limit on it, just goals that you want to do. What are 3 goals that I want to accomplish when it comes to my own personal health? What are 3 goals I want to accomplish in my career? What are 3 goals that I want to accomplish in my own personal leisure? What are 3 goals I want to accomplish in my faith journey? Whatever it is, lay those things out, throw them all out. And then once you've done the brain dump and the brainstorming of just putting all those things out, go back into those 3 things and then force yourself to prioritize. Okay, so now I know what the 3 things are that I want to do within my family. Let's prioritize 1, 2, and 3. Force rank them. Now that I know what the 3 things I want to accomplish in my faith, let me prioritize 1, 2, and 3. Once I know the things that I want to accomplish when it comes to work, leisure, whatever, force rank them, prioritize them, 1, 2, and 3. Bam, bam, bam. Force yourself to actually do that. So then now you actually have some agenda to work with. Okay, so now you take one of those, bring it all down. Let's say family. You have one thing that you want to improve within your family. Let's say setting Spending more time, being less on my Facebook feed at the dinner table, and I want to be more involved with that. Okay, great. So you want to be more involved at dinner. How are you going to accomplish that? So then you have the goal, set the different pathways upon which that you want to achieve that goal, and then set the obstacles that are going to happen within that. So I want to be more present at dinner with my family. What's the ways that I can do that? That means I have to be home at a certain time. That means I have to lock my cell phone in my car, or I don't know, being funny here, throw it in the sock drawer, whatever it is. I have to be courageous enough to encourage all my kids to turn off their devices as well, and for all of us to be able to sit at dinner. What are the obstacles to that? One, well, my own selfishness and a desire to check Facebook. Pushback from my kids that they're going to feel bored and not that and that they're going to miss TV shows or conversations with their friends or whatever it is. Those are the obstacles. You lay that all out so that way you're anticipating what it is, and then you have a plan for how you're going to overcome those obstacles. This is how we get very, very specific when it comes to goal setting. Brainstorm, prioritize, force rank yourself to do it, and then pick one of those and then go, what are the pathways of achieving that? What are the obstacles? How do I plan for the obstacles? That's the exercise I really wish I had time to do for today. But when I'm speaking about specificity, that's what I'm speaking about, getting to that level of specificity. Now, when you do prioritize your goals, one of the things that you also want to do within yourself is you want to be honest with what are your motivations for the goals. Good friend of mine who I've known for many, many years, has struggled with being overweight his entire life, morbidly obese, his entire adult life, as long as I've known him. And he is always, for many years has spoken about, people who are overweight, they know that they're overweight. People who smoke know that they smoke. It's not like you have to be the one to be like, oh, hey, you may want to lose a few pounds. Like they get it. Like, give me a freaking break, like that's just the truth. So he's tried for years on his own to lose weight. He's done diets, he's done different things, and it just can't seem to get the weight off until a couple of years ago. And a couple of years ago, his kids now are in their teenage years, and they're very athletic, and they were getting into cross country and running, and he wanted to go out and run with them. He thought this would be a fun way that we can build community within our family. We can do 5Ks together. We can do 10Ks together. We can do some races. We can things that we can do together as a family. Well, what he realized very quickly is that his obesity was preventing him from being able to have this family time. And so his motivation for losing the weight completely changed. It wasn't just for him, or it wasn't just for honestly, sometimes some altruistic or abstract notion of personal health. It seems abstract at times, but that's the truth. All of those things weren't enough of a motivator to get him to lose weight. But losing to his 12-year-old in a 5K, or not being able to keep up with his 14-year-old with doing the training, that was motivation. Not just out of a competitiveness, but out of a desire to want to share these experiences with his kids. And so once his motivation changed, bam, the weight started going off. And within 7 months, he lost 75 pounds. And he's continued to lose the weight, and he's getting very close to the goal that he has for himself and the target goal that he wants to get to.